And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker of the day, Adrian Alvarez, with the talk Suicide, the Facts. Mr. Alvarez is a practitioner in residence with the Disability Right Law Clinic at the American University Washington College of Law. Previously, he was a senior attorney with the Children's Law Center in D.C. Mr. Alvarez received his BA from the University of Texas at Austin, his MPA from Princeton University, and his JD from American University, Washington College of Law. He is an active member of the Allan Kardec Spiritist Society of Maryland and currently serves as secretary on their board. Please join us in welcoming Mr. Alvarez.
So good afternoon, friends. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here with us. One housekeeping matter. In the program and in the evaluations, the name of my presentation is a little bit different, but we changed the presentation name to more accurately reflect the content. So it's still, it's a little different, Suicide, the Facts. I also, before we start, I wanted to just begin by acknowledging that this is a difficult topic to discuss for some of us. I know because I've had someone very close to me that, lost their life through suicide. And I know that it's common enough that there are people here in this room who may have also lost a family member, a friend, or a loved one through suicide. And the reason why I say that is because I want us just to be mindful of that and to take care of yourself and to take care of each other. And what I mean by that is, there's no shame if you need to take a moment to collect your thoughts if something's triggering, and also to be mindful of the way we discuss. We don't want to discuss it in terms that are judgmental. We're here to bring facts, and we're here to speak about it through the lens of Spiritism. It's an important message that we're here to bring because we are speaking about suicide from the lens of immortal spirits that we all know we are. So I just wanted to start off acknowledging that and just to say, take care of yourselves and take care of others. So with that, I'd like to begin our discussion talking about some facts and figures about suicide. And I took my sources from the World Health Organization, which is a UN body that collects statistics and proposes policy initiatives in the area of health and mental health. And I also got my statistics from the National Institute of Mental Health, which is a division, some of you may know, is a division of the National Institute of Health here in Bethesda, Maryland, just down the street. And so the statistics and the facts that I'm going to bring today are both about suicide worldwide because, as many of us may know, it is a worldwide phenomenon. It's not just something that occurs in wealthy countries or in lower income countries or middle income countries. It's something that the entire world is having to address. But because we're here in the United States, I wanted us to speak specifically about facts having to do with the country that we live in, our country. So let's begin. So before we begin, I just wanted us to have a clear definition of the three things that we're going to be talking about and the statistics that we have. And so I wanted, as a lawyer, I love definitions. And so the very first one I wanted to talk about was suicide. And I'm going to read it and we're just going to parse it out a little bit. So the first is that death caused by self-directed injurious behavior with intent to die as a result of the behavior. So the statistics here are death, so we know it's a cessation of life caused by directed self-injurious behavior. So it means that it was caused by the person who died, not by some other force, not by an act of nature, not by natural causes, but it was death that was self-inflicted. And it was with the intent to die as a result. So the intent to die. So we're not talking about a situation where there was an accident where somebody was cleaning a firearm and accidentally detonated the firearm that then led to death. So the intention of self-inflicted harm has to be there. The other definition that I like to give is suicide attempt. Now, what is a suicide attempt? It's a non-fatal, self-directed, potentially injurious behavior with intent to die as a result of the behavior. So right at the very beginning, where we say a non-fatal, we know that it does not result in death. So it's an attempt at self-directed injurious behavior, but it doesn't result in death. And these are also statistics that are kept for good reason. We'll talk about that. And then we've got suicidal ideation, which is just a fancy way of saying a suicidal thought, thinking about, considering, or planning suicide. And it's important to keep track of the suicidal ideations because this is where we are able to provide assistance, those that are contemplating suicide. And even here in the attempt side, it's important to keep track of those statistics because for whatever reason, the attempt didn't go through. And so these are also people that should be targeted. Okay, so let's start from the global perspective. So it's a global phenomenon, and it's going to be very hard for you to read these statistics, but I just wanted to give you a sense of suicides. And when we're talking about the rates of suicides, we're talking about suicides per every 100,000 people. And the reason why we don't talk necessarily in numbers is because if we talk in just sheer numbers, we're not able to make comparisons over time. And so if we talk in 100,000 people's suicides by 100,000 people, then we're able to make comparisons over time because we're able to use the same base figure. And unless I specify others, the vast majority of the statistics that I'm bringing today are going to be from 2015, which is the last time that we have comprehensive data from the WHO. We've got projections for 2017 and for 2016, but we still don't have concrete data. Here in this, you can see that the darker the color, the higher the rate of suicide is. I would say that we should take some of these stats with caution because not every country worldwide has the capacity to capture data as accurately. So this is just sort of a general sort of feel for those statistics. But if we look at the numbers sort of as a whole, we know that in 2015, approximately 800,000 people ended their life through suicide. So let's just meditate on that figure. What does that mean? That means that every 40 seconds, somebody has died by suicide. It means that in an hour, so in the hour that we're here today, approximately 90 people will have ended their life through suicide. And if we look at a 24-hour period, that's over 2,000 people that will have ended their life through suicide. It's approximately 2,160 to be exact. So it's not an insignificant number if we break it down on those terms. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that it accounts for 1.4% of all deaths worldwide, or it did account for 1.4% of all deaths worldwide in 2015. And that made it the 17th largest leading cause of death. And that is sort of everyone generally. But we know that suicide does not afflict everyone equally. If we disaggregate those figures by male, female, by age, by race, ethnicity, we know that some people are at greater risk for suicide than others. If we disaggregate it by mental illness, by illness, we see that those statistics look a little bit different. So we're going to show a bit of those statistics. So just to give a small capshot, it was the second leading cause of death among people in the 15 to 29-year-old age range. And more men than women end their life through suicide. However, more women than men attempt unsuccessfully at suicide than men. So men, unfortunately, have a higher rate of completing the suicide. All right. So let's look at suicides in our country. And I'm going to do this over a series of charts from the National Institute of Health because it'll give you a better snapshot. And I'm going to walk you through because I appreciate that the data and the pictures are not very large. So in the United States, it was the 10th cause of death in 2015. That was a total of 44,000 individuals. What's interesting is that more people ended their life through suicide than were killed by homicide. Twice as many, in fact. In 2015, there were approximately 18,000 homicides, but a little over 44,000 suicides. It was, in the US, it was the third leading cause of death for the age range of 10 to 14-year-olds. And it was the second leading cause of death for 15 to 34-year-olds. So even though we'll see that more older people, in terms of sheer numbers, more older people die by suicide, older people also die by other causes. So it's not one of the leading causes of death. But for the young and folks that do not have as many health ailments in early years, it's a higher cause of death. So I wanted to just kind of look. This is how we break it down by age. And you can see, can everybody see these? As we get older, the number of suicides per 100,000 grows. And these statistics were from 2014. We got them from the National Institute of Health. And you can see at every age bracket, men have a higher rate than women. At every age bracket. And in terms of the greatest number, the people that are most vulnerable are men, 75 and older. And for women, it's women in the 45 to 64 age range that are most vulnerable to suicide. If we break down those statistics by race and ethnicity, we see that the two most vulnerable groups are white non-Hispanic men. The rate for white non-Hispanic men was 25.8 per 100,000. And the American Indian, Alaskan Native also had a very high percent. It's interesting too because indigenous peoples all around the world, not just in the United States, but indigenous peoples throughout the globe also have a higher rate of suicide than non-indigenous peoples. Now, if we look at the statistic for women, the two groups of women that are at highest risk are, again, Native American and Alaskan Native women, and non-Hispanic white women have the highest number. Okay, what I like about this is this tracks suicides across time. And again, this is why we're using the per 100,000. By this, we can show that total suicides, there's been a steady increase in total suicides in the United States since 1999 up until 2014. We see that in 1999, the total for both, the average for both was 10.5. But we can see that even then, it was much higher for men, than it was for women. But for both genders, there has been an increase. Here, there was a slight decrease, but then it went up again, sometime in the mid-2000s. And I don't know, what accounts for this small variation, but I think if we were to do the math, we would see that that variation was not statistically significant. So if we look at the statistics by state, we see that there's a higher number of suicides in the West. In the Rocky Mountain West, and in the sort of the Appalachian Mountains here, and here this sort of Midwest area. And we look at our region, Maryland and DC are slightly lighter than Virginia. Maryland and DC are between 10.37 to 11.61 deaths per 100,000. Oh no, I think it is. I think there might be lower. Yeah, 5 to 10, and then Virginia is a little slightly higher for our region. For Maryland, I know there's a lot going on in this slide, but I think what I wanted to point out in this slide is that it's the 12th leading cause overall in Maryland. On average, one person dies by suicide in Maryland every 16 hours in our state. And then it gives other figures, the costs of suicide in our state. In Maryland, it was the leading cause of death for the age range of 10 to 14, and the third leading cause for the age range for 15 to 34. So I bring these statistics not to be alarmist, but just to be matter of fact. This is the reality that we face in our country right now. But the good thing is, and I think the message that we all want to convey is that it's not a fait accompli. Nobody has to end their life through suicide. There are programs that are evidence-based that work. So I want to talk a little bit, just very briefly, about some of the risk factors for suicide. And not surprisingly, we find that mental illness is one of the leading causes, or one of the leading risk factors. People who suffer very severe mental illness, undiagnosed, untreated mental illness, are at greater risk for ending life through suicide. We also find that people with addictions are also at greater risk. And we find that people who have other illnesses, and this is especially true for the elderly, for folks who have chronic pain. There's some illnesses where chronic pain is a symptom, where up to 25% of people with those illnesses will end their life through suicide. But even in those situations, I was looking at I should have written it down and I didn't, but this particular illness where chronic pain, affects the face, there are ways to treat, there are ways to manage the pain. So even for those populations, suicide is not a done deal, so to speak. So that was essentially my presentation. I wanted to set the stage for us, and I wanted us to have a common framework to understand the other speakers today. I'm happy to answer any questions that I may be able to answer at the end of our talk, and I thank the organizers for inviting me to speak today.